Hi, I'm Laura Lee Siemens, and welcome to today's Bible study. So we're going to be going through the book of Daniel, and today we're starting with Daniel chapter 1. And I'm so excited to share this with you because Daniel is by far my favorite book. I absolutely love it. And I really wish in our churches we spent more time going through Daniel. So we're going to be starting with Daniel chapter 1. But before we get into Daniel chapter 1, I kind of have to explain to you what's been going on with Israel at this time. So Jehoiakim is the king of Israel, and he hasn't been a very good king at all. In fact, he's about to enter his fourth year as we start into Daniel. And what we see is that all the evil that he's done up until then, the 3 years of ruling, is really catching up to him. So the people of Israel, they're not following God anymore. They're worshiping other gods. They're doing things their own way. And just like any loving parent, what God says is he is going to give them a time out. Now that's really what the book of Daniel is. It's the beginning of this and the time spent during Israel's time out. Now, God, of course, gives them lots of warnings, and he says he loves them so much. In fact, God says he loves them with an everlasting love. And he says, I know the plans I have for you, and those plans are for love and prosperity and for peace. And he tells them that they will not be destroyed. Now, a lot of people take those verses and those times when God is talking to the nation of Israel and apply them to us. And we can apply them to us in the sense that, yes, we can see who God is, we can see his character, and when he says that he loves someone, keeps his promises, that he does. But those verses, those very famous verses, which I even have coffee mugs with those exact verses on it, they actually were meant for the people of Israel as God was telling them they were about to go into this 70-year time out. Now, you might think that if they said, whoa, you're going to have a 70-year time out, that's kind of a long time. Maybe they should turn back to God. Well, some people do. Some people continue to follow God, and Daniel is one of those. But a lot of people, they just continue to do things their own way. So the book of Daniel is the story of one of the people who continue to follow God, even though everyone else had turned and was doing things their own way. Now, Daniel had been taught that God loved him and God was going to take care of him and protect him, that he could trust God. But on this particular day, as the book of Daniel opens, that was probably really hard for Daniel to trust in and believe. You see, the nation of Babylon had actually come and surrounded Israel where they were. Now, there's no way for food to get in, there was no way for food to get out, and people were actually starving. And at that point, Babylon came in and conquered them. And we can see that here in Daniel chapter 1. After that happened, the Babylonians began to look through all of the boys that were left. And they were looking for boys who were good looking, who were smart, who were young, and Daniel and his friends were some of the boys that they took, and they captured them and they would take them away as slaves. So Daniel was probably a teenager at this point, and he was taken away from his family and he would never be returned. So this might actually seem as being unfair because Daniel was one of the people who had purposed in his heart to follow God. So if he had purposed in his heart to follow God, then why was he one of the people who was taken captive? And sometimes we don't understand when God puts things in our lives. And we say, God, like, I'm following you. I'm trying to do things your way. Why are these things happening to me? But we need to trust that in God's plan. And God did have a plan for Daniel, even though I'm sure at that moment in time for Daniel it was very difficult. So he was taken from his family, and they had to travel all the way across the land to go to the nation of Babylon. So when they got to Babylon, Daniel and his friends, they changed their names. So you can see that here in verse 7. So it says, Daniel was given the name Belshazzar, and he gave the name Hananiah, he got Shadrach, Mishael got Meshach, and to Azariah got Abednego. So when I was a little kid, my mom used to make the bed, and she would say, shake the bed, make the bed, and into bed you go. And it was Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that's how I always still today remember their names. So we most of the time we call Daniel's friends Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which was actually their new names. But we continue to call him Daniel, even though his name was changed to Belshazzar, which is confusing because there's another character comes later in Daniel that has a name very similar. So Daniel and his friends' names were changed because the king was trying to get rid of their Judaism. He didn't want them to be Jews anymore. He wanted them to be Babylonians. So they were given new names that were Babylonian names. And also they were going to be educated in the Babylonian ways. So that the king wanted them to really integrate into the Babylonian country and to get rid of their Jewish heritage and just become Babylonians. All right, so one of the first things they did after they got their new names is they were brought into this area where there was all of this amazing food. Now stop and think for a minute about how Babylon captured them. Now remember, their city was surrounded and they were starving. And then they had to travel all the way to Babylon. So if you're a young teenage boy, you have been starved into submission and then traveled a long way, and you're brought into this area where there is tons of amazing food. And all you want to do is just obviously jump in and eat. But God had given really, really strict rules to the Israelites on the foods that they were allowed to eat, the foods they were not allowed to eat. And one of the things they were not allowed to do is eat any food that had been sacrificed to an idol. So for a lot of these boys, that wouldn't have really been a big deal, especially if they had already turned and were worshiping other gods. But remember, Daniel had purposed in his heart that he was going to not defile himself. That means that he was going to continue to serve God and follow his rules, even in this new land. So he did not want to eat the food that had been offered to the idol. Now, I heard some people actually take this book, this chapter of the Bible, and use it as a way to explain why we should eat our vegetables. And that is absolutely not the point of this at all. The point was that he was not going to defile himself, and that he was going to continue to follow God's rules, even if his parents weren't there, the people from the temple weren't there, and even if it seemed like God had completely abandoned him. Okay, so what is Daniel going to do here? Well, he goes up to the steward, the person who is in charge of the people who have been captured at this point, and he tells him that he can't eat the food because it's been offered to idols. Now, the steward is a little clear here on the problem, because he's been given the job by the king to make sure that they eat the food. And if they don't eat the food, then he could be in really big trouble. And the reason the king is trying to get them to eat this food is because he wants them to be healthy and strong, because he's trying to turn them into great Babylonians. So the steward actually says, listen, you're going to have to meet with the king, and if you look really frail and you look sick and it looks like I haven't done my job, the king will actually probably cut my head off, because that's what the king did to people who didn't follow his orders. So while I really appreciate that you don't really want to eat this food because it goes against your religious customs, you're going to have to eat it because I like my head nicely attached to the rest of my body. So Daniel's really understanding here to this. I mean, obviously the steward has a pretty valid point here and a reason why he is going to make Daniel follow the rules. So Daniel kind of makes a bargain. He says, listen, why don't you go 1 week, let us eat just the vegetables and the water, and the other guys can eat whatever they want to eat. And then you can kind of look at us after a week, and if we look really sick and frail and it looks really bad, then we'll go with what you want to do. But just give us 1 week to prove to you that our God's going to take care of us. So he agrees, okay, 1 week, but if you don't look good, then we're not following through with this. But after a week, the amazing thing is that Daniel and his friends look amazing. They look strong, they're looking healthy, they're doing really well, and everyone else is not doing as well. They're kind of looking really sickly. So that was the beginning. They continue to go on to school, and after years of being in the Babylonian school, they finally get to go see the king for a test. And this is to see how well they've done at learning the language and the customs. And Daniel and his friends are, of course, the top 4 in the whole class, and they get to go on to be wise men for the king. So this is Daniel chapter 1. Now you can stop the video and you can go back and you can read it for yourself, and then tomorrow you can meet back here and we are going to go over Daniel chapter 2. I'm Lorelei Siemens, and this is the Bible Study.